Hi friends, this is Laura with Potpourri of Life. I hope that you're doing great. Today what I want to do is get back on track with my Lyme disease discussions. And some people, I realize that some people are poo-poo, it doesn't even exist. Well, there's a lot of things that you might not agree that exist, but people suffer from it. So whether you believe it or not, that's on you, and you don't have to listen to the series that I'm trying to complete and finish. So one of the things that I wanted to share, and this is a fact, that Lyme disease is grossly underreported in the United States. Lyme cases have more than doubled since the 1990s. The number of counties that are now deemed high risk for Lyme has increased by more than 320%. About 329,000 cases of Lyme disease occur every year, according to the latest research from the U.S. Centers of Disease Control and Prevention. That's a lot, folks. So if you don't believe it, this might, maybe not. If you don't believe it, you don't believe it. Lyme disease is the fastest growing infectious disease in the United States and in Western Europe. Public funding for this disease is still far below that of the less common illnesses, receiving less than 2% of public funding for West Nile and less than 0.2% of funding for the HIV and AIDS, even though Lyme affects more people. But fortunately, as awareness continues, hopefully that funding will come forward so that we can educate doctors and we can get medications out there, or we can teach them about holistic means to heal and to feel better. So I'm hopeful. During the time when I was at my worst, I hated it. Because as a patient, you're like a ping pong going back and forth between people who don't believe you. And you just get to the point where it's just so exhausting, which is why I am very fortunate that I obtained a physician, through different things. I was seeing him for something else, and then I was talking to him about some stuff, and he says, "Laura, I think you have Lyme disease." And so he listened to all my complaints, and I felt horrible telling him. And he goes, "No," he says, "I want you to do a test." And so when it came back, it was like that. And I've shared this before. It was like, wow, this is an answer, finally. It wasn't, "Well, I think you have fibro." "No, I think you have MS." "No, I think you have this." It was like, trust me, I was diagnosed for a number of things. And they still think I have primary progressive MS. And I'm still having a hard time believing it, because every time I went to him, the neurologist, he says, "Well, I can't treat you because I really don't know," and all that. So it was kind of like, it messed with my brain. But anyways, he was an awesome doctor, and I really liked him because he really wanted me to feel better. And he was the one that when I went for a spinal tap, and I told him, I said I went off all my herbs when they did that, and he asked me why. I said, because there are some herbs that can cause people to bleed. And this is very important, folks. Those of you who are trying to do this holistically without anybody helping you, you need to understand that herbs are just as strong as pharmaceutical drugs. You need to understand that these things can hurt you if you're not doing it appropriately, and you always do it a little bit at a time. A lot of people don't tell you this, and not all physicians who are Lyme specialists can tell you that. So just be aware that if you're going to use herbal meds, and they're fabulous, they've helped me a great deal, know that they can be dangerous too. So when I told him I went off it, he says, "Oh, I wish you hadn't done that, because what happened is I went off it and all my symptoms, I was flaring." And he goes, "I wish you didn't do that." And I said, "Why?" He says, "Because those herbs are helping you." I said, "Yeah, but I didn't want to bleed." And I didn't. I was off the medication for 2 weeks, which is typical it's not the same as a procedure where you're going under anesthesia, but to me, I saw it as an opportunity to protect myself from having a side effect. Was I over careful, over cautious? Possibly, because I'm that way. But I would rather be cautious about using pharmaceuticals versus herbs and stuff, because I'm just that way. We have to be careful. Anyways, I'm going on a tangent. So because of that, at least people are becoming more and more aware. And I'm hoping that the funding, if we can get it, the doctors can be educated and the doctors can be given that, whoa, I did not know moment. So infected ticks have been verified in 42 of 58 counties in California. The primary carrier on the West Coast is the western black-legged tick, and its preferred host is the gray squirrel. Here in New England, we're talking about deer. On the East Coast, the region, black-legged tick is the principal carrier. This tick prefers the white-footed mouse. Do you see? It's not just deer ticks. These ticks are getting onto all kinds of animals. That's why you're keeping an eye out for your dogs. Climate change seems to be giving this disease an advantage by helping ticks reproduce and helping them live in more parts of the United States. Ticks cannot survive in very cold climates. And as we have warmer and warmer climates here in New England, they're able to thrive a little bit longer. So because people are finding them in the winter. Now we have some really cold days, but they don't last a long time. So, but in saying that, climate change. The world has always had climate change. How is it happening now is there's a variety of reasons of why it's happening. But it's happening. Things are changing. So that's for another topic. Anyways, the warmer temperatures also increase the growth rate of ticks. Some researchers estimate that the global warming has increased tick reproduction by up to 2 times in the United States and up to 5 times in Canada. So ticks are everywhere. This is something that you can't run away from, but you can do prevention. You know, you make sure you're doing all the preventative measures, and I will do a video on that. Now, those of you who don't know, Lyme disease is named from the area in which it was first discovered, which was in Connecticut in a town called Lyme. In the 60s and 70s, with a population of 12,000 living in Old Lyme and East Hampton, 39 children were diagnosed with juvenile rheumatoid arthritis, and 12 adults were diagnosed with arthritis that was said to be from an unknown cause. There's some other things that it makes me chuckle because of some other things that somebody says, well, they had this from an unknown cause. It's different stuff. And I won't go into it because that's an invasion of somebody else's privacy. And we kind of chuckled about it, but we don't know. But there are some literature that tells where Lyme disease comes from, but I'm not going to go down that rabbit hole. Now, still many people can attribute its transmission only to ticks. But a growing number of researchers, including one of the leading authorities on Lyme disease, Dr. Klinghardt, believes that the bacteria can be spread by other biting or blood-sucking insects, including mosquitoes, fleas, spiders, and mites. So sometimes you get those little rings from insects. So it's very possible, because they're biting the mammals that are out there, like the mice and the rats and everything else that's out there. And then we know that dogs and cats can get infected too. It's interesting that they have a shot for them, but not humans, and they're testing it. But when they were testing the vaccine that they were trying to produce, that's what I was looking for, they were saying that it would prevent. So those of us who have been dealing with Lyme disease for years, it wasn't going to protect us. And they weren't making it really vocal out there, but would I get it? Right now, it's not proving to be effective. So no, I'm not going to go and do that. I am not going to go on a trial run of a vaccine at this juncture. There's just too much controversy with trials of stuff like that I had to go through so many antibiotics and going back and forth, and I'll get into it a little bit in a minute. But I just don't want more stuff in my body if it's doing a trial on this right now. Now, what I wanted to go to is a lot of people think it's contagious. When I first found out I had Lyme disease, one of the things that people were talking about in some of the Lyme groups that I was in, and I had to leave some because some people get really nasty. And a lot of time they're so adamant about what they believe, adamant that this worked for them. That's the cool thing about Lyme. It treats every patient different. Kind of amazing, huh? So I think that's what confuses physicians, that confuses naturalists, it confuses everybody, because the ones that understand that Lyme is real, they're the ones that realize that Lyme affects everybody differently. And just because it affected me one way, it's not going to affect everybody the same. Some people who recently have been infected, they get over it because they get right on the antibiotic and then they seem to be doing better. But I do share a word of caution. Always be aware of the symptoms and so forth, because it can come back and haunt you. Now, when I was a young girl, I was not treated for it. There was a time where I had a couple of weeks that I was just a zombie. It was like I was in this flu, whatever. And I was tired and I was exhausted and I didn't have a fever, but I was just kind of like, I wasn't myself. And so I just kind of went about my day until it finally got better, and so on. And then I had nothing to it until later on, when I started having some medical procedures where all of a sudden it just seemed like things were happening. So we're not going to blame the procedures. We're going to blame it about what I attribute it to. Not blame, I attribute it to Lyme disease, the it is such a tongue twister. The bacterium gets into your system and it hides. It gets cozy and it just stays there. And if it's cozy and it's happy, it doesn't bother you, and you move on with your life and you do fine. And then you start treating it and then it comes out. So numerous reports indicate that Lyme appears, they were saying that Lyme disease is contagious, and that's what I was getting to, my apologies. So in these groups they were talking about, it's contagious, you can pass it down to your babies, and I'm thinking, oh goodness, I had 3 daughters. Now it's all my fault. And then, but if you don't know, you don't know. And then they were saying, well, you're going to give it to your husband if you're having sex. If you're a guy, you're going to give it to your wife. And I'm like, what are you loonies all about? That's what I just said. Okay, enough's enough. Because now there are people that truly believe this. I don't. I talked to my specialist and I asked him, people are saying that I should not have intercourse with my husband because I could give it to him. And I said, to be honest with you, if I didn't get it as a child, David's gone hunting. He's probably reinfected me a number of times. So who's really at fault? We're not going to know. And my husband doesn't have Lyme disease. So I think we need to be very careful when we as patients are telling each other how to tend or care for ourselves. Don't go and tell a couple that is doing fine in their intimate part of their relationship that they should stop. Because you know what? That might be the thing that keeps that Lyme patient going. So, I'm not going on a tangent here. I'm just saying, try to understand that each of our situations is very unique, but we can survive through it. The worst part about Lyme disease is that people lose hope. And so, unfortunately, many people die from it because they give up hope. And that's as much as I'm going to say. And sometimes the disease can take them, but more often than not, no, I don't know the statistics, so I'm not going to go there. But people can die from different causes there. Not necessarily from the Lyme, but from the side effects and the different parts of the disease that can bring them down. Let's see. So numerous reports indicate that Lyme-causing bacteria appears to be passed down gestationally. I can never say that word. A new study published in the Journal of Investigative Medicine suggests that Lyme disease may also be sexually transmitted. It's saying it suggests. That doesn't mean it is factual. They haven't done scientific research to prove that. And that's why I'm saying a lot of times we can speculate. We can say things, even doctors, they need to be careful on how they're saying, well, you really need to stop that because you're going to give it to your husband, or you need to stop that because your wife's going to get sick. I think we need to let people live their lives. And instead of telling them, don't do things that bring them joy, instead say, okay, let's, approach how we can do this. Unfortunately, the first approach for Lyme disease, once you're truly diagnosed with the disease, is that you go on antibiotics. And those of us who had Lyme disease for a long time, and that's usually what happens, is we're being tested, and it could take years before finally somebody says, whoa, this is what you have. And then you go on to a further study to find out that you really do have Lyme disease, and mine confirmed it. It was CDC approved diagnoses, so I was able to be treated because of that. Now, some doctors, because of the testing that's done quickly in your doctor's office, those are not ready, but you need to be on the antibiotic to kill it at the get-go. I don't know how to better say that. Anyways, our findings will change the way the Lyme disease is viewed by doctors and patients. It explains why the disease is more common than one would think if only ticks were involved in transmission. So they're going back to that we can pass it on to our children, we can pass it on to those we live with, those that we are intimate with. Borrelia Burgdorferi is a bacterial species of the spear sheet class of the genus Borrelia. These spear sheets infect many vertebrate animals, including small mammals, lizards, and birds. Ticks most frequently acquire spear sheets from infected rodents during their larval feeding. Yummy! So spear sheets are known for their unique corkscrew shape and the way they move in the corkscrew type of motion. I've shared this before. What it does is, in order to get into the different areas, your muscles and your joints and everywhere that you're affected, it kind of spins itself in. And then it finds a place to hide and get nice, cozy, and comfy. They are very slow to replicate, and they survive without iron, which we need in our blood, which is very rare for bacteria. So instead, they use manganese for their survival. Unlike most disease-causing bacteria and fungi, it is believed that Borrelia Burgdorferi does not emit a toxin. But the bacteria do seem to have a direct interaction with the cell tissues that it infects. And that's why people get really, really sick. And we might not understand why, because all of us have different cells. Our cells are made up with all kinds of things, but no two people are alike. We might have similarities. My kids and I, we might have similarities. They have similarities with their dad and stuff. But it doesn't mean that everybody is alike. We're all different. Okay, so its corkscrew shape bores deep into tissues and cartilage, including the brain and the nervous system. This leaves the bacteria out of reach of most antibiotics. This bacteria can also mutate out of its corkscrew shape to form that to a form that is able to live out inside our cells. Intracellular is what you'll hear. Once again, leaving hard to kill with antibiotics. Borrelia Burgdorferi and other spear sheet bacteria from dormant cysts. Now, did you hear that? Other spear sheet bacteria. Lyme disease isn't just one bacterium. It's multiple. And so we want to hit it from the get-go in hopes that you don't get the chronic persistent Lyme, such as what I've had. Some people call it chronic Lyme or long-term Lyme, or they have different terms for it. So it's really hard to kill with the antibiotics. They form dormant cysts inside the body that block antibiotic activity, and the higher the dosage of antibiotics, the more resistant it becomes. Now, when we say that, and I talked to my Lyme doctor about this, and because I really did not want to go on antibiotics. I am one that does not like to be on medications. You can ask any physician that I've ever seen. No, she doesn't like it. But I do go on it if they can give me the rationale of what the treatment plan is. They can tell me that I won't be on it long term, and that they can help me figure this out. And throughout the course of this, I am just one of those investigative patients that just kind of researches and digs and digs and digs until I get the answers. Not so that I can say no, but that I can understand what is going on and say, okay, this one makes sense. Let's go for it. Now, with the Lyme disease treatment that I was on multiple antibiotics. Seriously, I would be on them for 2 to 4 months, and it would be 2 to 4 antibiotics. And it was it was hard. He would start me off on a couple, and then he would add more, and then we might add a few supplements and stuff like that. And I'll tell you, I was a drugstore. That's all I can tell you. And I hated it. And then you're dealing with the insurance company who can deny different things. And so your physician has to say, okay, now I got to go and give her something a little bit different. And then you have a patient who reacts. They get sicker. And that's part of what happens with antibiotics. They can make you worse before you're better. And that was a hard thing that I had. I struggled with that. And he would say, Laura, hang on, hang on. And that's one thing when people ask me, it doesn't matter if they have Lyme disease or what they do, they want to. I know a few people who know that I use natural forms of hormone replacement. And they would say, well, how did you deal with it? And I said, well, I just do such and such. But I said, you have to work with your doctor. And so they would go to their doctor and they would start something and then they would get off in a week. And I said, why'd you go? Sorry about that. My battery died on me. So I would ask them, why'd you go off? They said, well, it was making me feel bad. And I said, that's the Herxheimer response when we try something new. Some things when you get really, really sick, you should go right off. But connect with your physician and tell them your symptoms so they can determine whether, yeah, that medicine's not going to work for you. Whether it's hormone replacement or whether it's Lyme disease, or no matter what symptoms no matter what disease you're working with or illness you're working with, always tell your physician, I'm going off and this is why. Because they might tell you, please hang on for another 3 days or 2 weeks or whatever the case may be, because you're going through a Herxheimer. It's affecting your body and your body's going to respond to it. Do I like that response? No. Who does? But when you have a physician who truly, truly wants you to feel well, you kind of have to pay attention. But I was feeling worse on these medications. But what happens is this one gets to a point where everything is settling down. Then they bring in another antibiotic, because that's what these spear sheets are doing. They get used to the antibiotic, and so they just kind of rest, and then all of a sudden you start feeling bad again. And so you have to combat it all the time. Just when you're starting to get better, the doctor gives you another antibiotic. Now, maybe they're not doing it that way as much anymore. I don't know. I do know, even though I do not like the amount of antibiotics I was on, I think because you end up with yeast infections, you end up with all kinds of stuff. I know for a fact my physician cared, because he had seen so many people with Lyme disease, and his ultimate desire was to see people heal from it and not live the way that we're living when we are doused in something we don't understand. I want to go on. Some of the symptoms, even though the antibiotics are bad, there are a variety of symptoms. Now I'm going to share a list, and I have shared, and I'll try to link it below, or even, I think it's over here that'll show up, where I shared it before in a previous video, that Lyme disease, the list of them, and I shared all the symptoms I had, but I shared the complete list of what could be Lyme disease. But in saying that, I want you to understand, as I share these, that doesn't mean you have Lyme disease. That's why you need to work with a physician or a naturopath or a specialist in Lyme disease. And, there's a variety of specialists out there, but you gotta research it and find somebody that you can connect with and trust. So, symptoms of Lyme disease: rashes. Now, yeah, a lot of people get that bullseye rash on wherever they get bit, but you can get other rashes too. That is the most common one that people think is the only way you know you have Lyme disease. That is not the only way you will know you have Lyme disease. If you get a tick bite, try to save the tick. Although most people wouldn't even think of it, they kind of try to get it off and squish it and all that. Whereas if you can get it out and put it in a container and let your doctor analyze it, or send it off to a place that can analyze whether or not that tick had Lyme. And I don't know the places that do that. I'm understanding that there are labs out there that are doing this, which is awesome. Then we can find out, are you okay? But in the interim, while you're waiting, you might need to go on that doxy. You might need to go on doxycycline, because if you do have the spear sheath, you have that bacterium that entered your body, you want to get to it right away. I'm not suggesting let's live on antibiotics, because I think we've gotten to the point where I was on antibiotics for a different thing, and it doesn't work for me anymore. and it was the one that I was most comfortable being on if I needed it, and now it doesn't work. But I'll share on that another time. So you get rashes, and you can get rashes from different things too. So, and one of the things that people noticed about me was I would get red all through here, and it looked like a rash. And I don't have that. I don't know, maybe I do. But it was really bad before. So, and I looked tired, and it was just one of those things. But you can get the rash from the bite, and you can also get a rash that is on you and you can't get rid of it. Fatigue, that is a big one. But fatigue comes with a lot of diseases, or illnesses. When you're tired, take a nap. Those of us who work, like I worked many hours, and I was getting so tired where I used to be able to do so much, I got to the point where I couldn't. And I would get home and I would crash, and I didn't understand. I really felt horrible. I felt like I was dying, because one of the other symptoms was I felt like bugs were eating me, and it was like, it was awful. Anyways, joint pain. Joint pain is tough. My doctor, my bone doctor, sorry, see, brain fog, it happens. Whether it's my age or Lyme, it doesn't matter. So Dr. D, he was the one that I went to for all my joint issues. And I said to him, I said, do I need hip replacement? Because we did x-rays to find out that, I didn't need hip replacement. He goes, probably down the road. He goes, you got some arthritis in there. He goes, but I don't see it as a problem. We don't need to do anything. And fortunately, at that time, I was also doing some surgical tech training. And so I got to talk to a variety of different, why can I not think of this? Orthopedic docs. There we go. But I got to work with them, and I got to listen, and they would show me how the arthritis affected our bodies, and when they took it out, or when they just they replaced the stuff. So when my orthopedic doctor told me, he goes, Laura, not right now. And he would tell me, 10 years from now, maybe we'll see you. And he kept saying that every year. And it got to be about year 5, and I said, you're never going to do this procedure. He goes, you're not that far along where you need surgery. And that's what I liked about him. And I still have a high regard for him. I haven't seen him in a number of years, maybe two or 3 years. And what I liked about him is he didn't rush into, a surgical procedure for me. Not at all. When I had a rotator cuff, yeah, that needed to be done. But he didn't rush into it because it wasn't necessary. You want to work with physicians who want to educate you, who will do the proper testing, and then when the testing is done, is sit down and talk with you and share with you why they're going to do that. But when he got these test results, he would show me, he goes, Laura, and maybe it was because he knew that I did the surgical tech, because he was one of the docs that I followed as well, is that he could show me this, you're not ready for hip replacement, because my hips were killing me and my knees were killing me. We tried injections, we tried all kinds of stuff, but it wasn't time. But that's how Lyme disease affects us. It can affect your joints and your bones. You can get flu-like symptoms. And when I think I got it, I was in school, middle school, and there was 2 or 3 weeks that I walked around like in a daze. Like I didn't want to stay home due to the dynamics at home, but I just kept going. And this is part of who I am. It's like, I'm going to make it through. And I did eventually, 3-4 weeks later, 2 or 3, I don't remember how long. Eventually, I got back to feeling better. But that's what happens, is you just don't feel right. So some people get a fever and others don't. Then you have sleep disturbances where you can't sleep and there's things going through your mind. And that can be the neurological aspect of it. You have so many other things going on that you just wake up, or your pain, all those things. Cognitive decline. And that's where, your brain's not functioning right. And one of the things that happened to me, and it happens to others, is, I'd be driving somewhere that I'd been to all along. And I'd be going along and I'm like, where am I? Where am I going? And I had to kind of like think, and I never had to pull over because it didn't get that bad. I'm like, okay, where am I going? I'm going to the grocery store. And it really was a strong thought process. That's exhausting. When you have to think that hard to kind of let those things register, it's very fatiguing. So, and then there's vision changes, and I'm fortunate because I have not had any vision changes that I know of. Yes, I wear glasses. My eyes have not changed in the last, well, I haven't seen an eye doctor in 4 years. I have to go, which I'm making plans to see one this year. But I haven't, the last couple times I went 2 years apart, there were no changes. And then prior to that, I was seeing another eye doc and nothing had changed throughout this whole ordeal. And so that did not affect me, but it could affect others. So you could get other neurological problems. I used to get tremors, and every now and then if I start getting tremors, I kind of get nervous. If you ever get an eye twitch, that's a tremor. Sometimes my hands would shake. There's this kind of weird stuff. It's all neurological stuff, and it's kind of funky. Skin outbreaks, heart problems. I had to see that cardiologist because different stuff, and one of the docs, and this was prior to us even, this is prior to my surgical tech program, and but they insisted that I was having heart problems. I said this is nothing, I'm fine. And so what they did was they had me go to the ER, and I said, you got to be kidding. I said, I drove here alone. I'm going home, and I'll have David drive me back. But don't tell anybody if you're having something flippy on your EKG, they will not let you go home. So I had to get my husband. I told him, I said, David, you got to come get me. And I called one of the kids from the church who was driving. I said, would you go get my car and bring it? It was a mess. Because I'm thinking, there's nothing wrong with me. So I got into the hospital, and they did some stuff, and then they put me in a room, and I got there, and fortunately I knew the cardiologist that came in, and he was somebody that I went to church with, and he says, Laura, what are you doing here? I said, I don't know. I told him I didn't need to be here. But this is what happens, is your body responds differently. And I mean, I was joking. It was a serious matter. I understand. It's a serious matter. But it's like in my heart of hearts and in my gut of guts, I had other things going on. And I said, I don't know why I'm here. And he goes, well, your EKG is really far off. I said, I don't think anything's wrong. So we talked a little bit, and then we ended up we were going to place a stent because of all the symptoms, but we went to do the procedure, and there was nowhere where there was blockage. And so I was really glad about that. But it's kind of like, he shook his head, and, my primary care at that time shook her head, and she says, I don't understand. But the interesting thing is when we rule things out, what doctors do is when they rule things out, they stop. They don't help you any further. And I mean, I frustrated one set, then I go on to another, and I really did like one of my other docs, but I ended up leaving her because of how things were changing in the office. Not because of her, but because the office dynamics were changing. And this was long before COVID. And she was trying to help me figure out what was going on. She did not believe that I had Lyme disease. And because, like I said, this is all new to everybody, and it's just becoming more and more prevalent in our world. And so a lot of people just think it's a made-up disease, and she thought that I was being misled by my specialist. But that's okay. But things were happening, and so I just said I love her dearly, and I told her that, but I had to move on. So it didn't matter where I went, nobody believed it. So that's life. But now they're starting to see this, okay? So mood changes. That happens. And it's, for somebody who suffers with Lyme disease, it is a awful, awful feeling of not feeling normal. And what is normal? In today's world, there is no such thing as normal. But normal for me was not having these ups and downs of emotions or bursts of anger. And when I went to my Lyme specialist, when I finally went to him, I said, I get so angry and there's no reason. And then at that point, there was some other things that were going on. He goes, Laura, it's okay. This is what happens when you have Lyme disease. This happens when you're not feeling good. And so he reassured me. He says, we're going to get you out of there, which is really kind of cool. But there's a lot of other things that go on when you're sick. You end up having things that you always remember. So there's always going to be triggers when you talk to somebody and they don't believe something. you have that trigger of like, I'm not going to talk to them because they won't believe me. And that's the way we get as Lyme patients. Pain. Pain is unbearable. I had pain all the time to the point where I was taking baths every night in hot water and Epsom salts. And in doing so, my husband would later do massages for me. Thank goodness he did that for me. And I still see a massage therapist. I try to see her every other month. Sometimes I have to stretch it to 3 months. It depends on, the financial aspect of it, because going to that, it's not covered by insurance. And quite honestly, I don't want it to be covered by insurance, because that's the one care provider I go to that doesn't take notes and submit it to the world to know, that I'm having, she's working on different things. I like that kind of care. Right now, I feel like my private life is no longer private in reference to my health. And so I just like that aspect. Now, I want to share something with you that some people, like if you get in groups, say you've just been diagnosed with Lyme disease and you are encouraged to get yourself involved with other Lyme groups. We call ourselves the Lymies. I never called myself that. But anyways, people have a different view and a different opinion. And sometimes they'll go by what they believe. And they'll tell you, you got to do this, this, and this, and you need these supplements and that supplements. And it can be overwhelming, most especially if you are newly diagnosed as chronic Lyme. And, if you were just getting the antibiotics and taking care of it, usually most people are feeling better soon thereafter, but not everybody. So, when you've had it for a long time, because by the time I was diagnosed, it was many years, you got to be careful. And I used to kind of like, like when they were telling me that I could give it to my husband, I was like, I don't think so. I talked to my Lyme specialist. He goes, no, you will be fine. And I know a lot of you are going to say, who is this guy? None of your business. Because what he did for me is he got me to a point where my herbs started to help. Within a year or two, probably 2 years, I was able to then start researching some herbal options to help with different symptoms. And, over the next 2 years, so I was on antibiotics for 4 years, and he would have me alternating in different things. And with that, I started trying the herbs, and that's what helped me the most. Did it clear it up? I don't know. I'm doing really good right now. But there are some things that have helped, and I know that oregano and thyme tea is really helpful. There's, when they came out with a doctor doing research at New Haven University in Connecticut, came out that stevia would help kill the bacterium. She was doing studies, and they were coming out, and you can look it up. I think her name is Dr. Evie. I can't remember her last name, but it's from the University of New Haven, Connecticut, and look up Lyme disease studies. And they were finding that it was helping patients. And so I was using raw stevia. At first I was buying it in a bag, the white stuff that has been bleached. That's not good for anybody, so don't use that. But they also had, so I started growing stevia, and I started using that. And that was fine. But I started taking the tincture. I was doing drops of stevia, and I'm not sure if that helped, but I'm sure along with all the other herbs that I've taken, I think it all has come together. And I still have flares. I have moments of pain. I have this and that. But for the most part, I'm doing really well. So there is a full list. I will try to link it below. And also that list I mentioned, I will try to have posted here as a link that you can go to right there. Most people who have been diagnosed with Lyme, including those who test positive, never recall being bitten. And that's one thing that I want to let you know. It doesn't have a telltale sign of a bullseye rash. So not everybody is going to know that they got bit. Let me see. I think there was something else I wanted to share. But yeah, there's more that I want to share, but I'm going to do it in piecemeal. So I do think that the more we learn and the more that we stay on top of things, like because Lyme disease is spreading across the United States and other countries, we need to be aware that this is spreading fast. Is it because of our our nation changing in terms of our climate? It could be. It could be a number of things. But more importantly, we need to be proactive. Like, some people think guinea hens. I don't have guinea hens, but they eat ticks. But I also found that other chickens eat ticks too. But that does not mean the other chickens are going to eliminate them. But our yard, even prior to having chickens, we never had ticks in our yard. We've been very fortunate. We go over to my father-in-law's house when he was alive, ticks everywhere. And my husband, over the whole course of us doing the estate, he came home once with a tick. I said, stay away. And so we just take it off and put it in a little medicine cup or medicine container, and you put it in there with some alcohol, and eventually it'll die. Just cut off the oxygen ability. So one time, I was so mean. There was a tick we found, and I put it in a container to see how long it could live without oxygen. I did this as a test. It lasted over 3 days. I'm not kidding you. If you ever get a tick, put it in a cup and cut off the oxygen. They live a long time. If I had then oxygen absorbers, should probably put one of those in and see if it sucks the life out of them. I know I sound cruel, but ticks cause horrible diseases. And Lyme disease is horrible. I do not wish it on my worst enemy. And so I want to share information about Lyme disease of what I know and the literature I'm learning, because I think it's really important for us to be aware. Now, I realize that, there are many people who are dealing with the COVID, long COVID, and all of this. And I feel horrible for them, because it's not something that any of us planned. It's not something that we ever desired. And when they first came out with it, one of the things I said to my husband, I said, David, and I was listening to some of the doctors saying that if they get it, we might not be able to cure it. It could be some patients might end up dealing with this for long term. And I said, oh my goodness. So patients who are dealing with long COVID, or, COVID that's lasting long, or you keep having it recur, my heart bleeds for you, because what I'm finding is patients, including medical personnel, whether they're nurses or doctors or others, their doctors are kind of like putting it aside. And we need to do better in our healthcare system. We need to do better in listening. We might not be able to cure people, but you know what? We need to do better. And if we can't cure them, which everybody wants a cure, and we want a one-time pill, all better. But that's not going to happen when we are so sick. So I do want to encourage those of you who have Lyme disease, suspect that you have Lyme disease, and if you do suspect, please do your due diligence. Don't just assume you have Lyme disease. Talk to your care provider, and if they're not kind of helping you get the proper testing, then reach out to a Lyme specialist. There are more and more out there, but be aware that some do not take insurance, and they charge like $800 to $1,200 for your visit. That's crazy. And some people have spent thousands upon thousands and have gone into serious debt because of Lyme disease. I don't want that for you. Hopefully, as I progress, I will be able to share some of the remedies that might work for some. And I say might, because just like antibiotics work wonders for many, it doesn't work for everybody. The same thing will apply with herbal medicine. So when I share some of these things, please take note that I'm sharing what I know and what I experienced using herbs. I also need to share a disclaimer. I am not a doctor. I'm not a nurse. Even though I worked in medicine, that does not constitute me being able to diagnose you or tell you that what worked for me is going to work for you. Because the fact remains that what works for one patient, even when a doctor is treating you, doesn't necessarily mean it's going to work for another. And the reason is that sometimes those pharmaceutical drugs might have products in it that you might be allergic to. And that's why when a doctor wants to prescribe something for me, I kind of like say, well, what's in it? And they don't always know. The last one that was recommended, I did some deep research, and I had to go right. I had to dig deep. Let's just put it that way. And I'm like, wow, he didn't know. Should he have? I think so. But the point is I did my due diligence, just like you should with your medications. Ask your doctor. They get paid really good money, and this is their job. And when they say, well, most people, do fine with it, you got to remind them you are not most people. You are an individual. You need to understand what's in that medication, and you need to understand all the side effects, because I think that's important, and that's how we heal. Now, where am I at today? I have some moments of Lyme flares, but I am doing so much better. Years back, you would not have gotten this energy out of me when I was first diagnosed. I was lethargic all the time. So I'm sharing this because that was in 2014 when he finally diagnosed me. So we're almost at 9 years. So there is hope. It took a long time. This is the first year I had energy in terms of being able to physically move stuff and everything. So there is hope. For those of you who want to give up, please don't. You are a valuable person. You are somebody special, and you are meant to be here. So don't give up. Hang tough and just try to find the right people. And so hopefully, as I continue on with this series, I'll be able to provide some more information that you might be able to glean from that might help you. So folks, I hope you have a great night, and God bless you.